All right, so you were saying you worked in the financial district.
I did for a while. Took the boys to a nursery school and parked the car and took a streetcar downtown. And my husband was at the UC medical school at the hospital on Parnassus. And we lived here about 5 years. East Bay too. But it was mostly to work and back. We didn't have very much money and we didn't have very much time to do the things. So we did go to the park and the zoo a lot. And later years, I've come back on tours, like I was a tourist, that I'd never seen San Francisco. And that's always been interesting to explore. The architecture in San Francisco has always intrigued me. And coming from pioneer stock in Northern California, talking about early days of mining and forestry. So this was a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Humboldt Bay area, fishing was one of the big industries when I was born and raised in Humboldt County. So I'm 93 now. So,
Tell how you would get a seat on the cable car.
oh, yes, that was a trick.
All right.
I didn't really knit, but I bought yarn and needles and pretended like I was knitting a sock. And I'd go up a little ways, and if I pulled out my knitting, I would get a seat on the streetcar. But we lived here and enjoyed being near what we could do in San Francisco, coming from a small town in Northern California. And people would always say, "Oh, we're going to the city." They always said city instead of San Francisco. So.
How and what year and how old were you when you first came here?
Oh, came here in 1948. And my husband was in medical school. And one son was born here in San Francisco. And I think he's proud of that. His older brothers were born in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed Hospital when my husband was stationed there in the service. And then their sister was born over in Fresno when we moved to Fresno. So they're a mixed batch.
And so what was your impression? Even though you didn't get out a whole lot, you said you went to the park and the zoo, and money was tight and time was tight. What was your impression of San Francisco still? Like, what was your general impression of living here? What was it like?
Oh, it was really wonderful because we had read so much about the history of San Francisco, and that is of interest. It still is of interest to me. But we had a close group of friends, and we went back and forth to their homes mostly. instead of going to some of the things that were available but were a little out of our league.
Like what? What was out of your league?
Well, opera and musicals and plays. We just didn't have the time or money to do that. But I know it was available. And the ball games, in more recent years, I've come to San Francisco for the baseball games. We would come down, my daughter and I would come down on a bus load and go to the game. And that is the way to get a seat right off the bus, right to a seat at the park. Because it is so crowded to find a place to park. But
Do you feel like living in San Francisco had an impact on you? Like, did you feel the sense of the city and its your relationship to it? Or was it more of a place you were living with people and life went by? And
I don't think that we ever became really accustomed to San Francisco of a place to live, because my husband was in med school and that took up all of his time, and we didn't expect to stay here. Some of our friends did. They did internships and residencies in the local hospitals.
mm-hmm.
But we went to Fresno. So
Now, I guess my last question would be, thank you, by the way, for sharing. So you told me a story about the cable car. What about the wharf, the other like major spots that San Francisco is known for? Did you ever go spend time, at Pier 39 or Fisherman's Wharf, or any other experiences on the cable car, or I don't know, what else is that classic San Francisco?
Dad did sailing.
Pardon?
Dad did some sailing on the little boat.
Well, we did go to Pier 39, but that was in its early days.
So what was, do you have a memory from there, or?
Well, some of the Alioto's fish company comes to mind, and he was popular as a ball player, and he came to Eureka one time as a guest at one of our junior senior prom dances, and that was a big thrill.
Okay.
So
This was your kids had junior senior prom dances, or you had a junior senior prom dance
yes.
here?
No.
In Eureka, but he came up to that.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. We always came back later to San Francisco for my husband to go to some of the musicals. And he was an organist, and he liked to go to some of the concerts. And we did that. It was quite a drive down from Redding. But that was his main enjoyment, was his music.
So was San Francisco a place to come for culture? Like
yes.
That you didn't, okay. And
because we were living in more rural areas.
In Northern California.
Northern California.
Okay.
In Redding and Eureka.
And do you remember the intersection you mentioned you lived here in San Francisco?
17th Street was across street, and there was and Cold Street, and there was a fire hall on 17th Street, and they actually had a Dalmatian dog that rode on the fire truck when it roared out of the fire department. Bob and Roy really did look forward to that. So.
Are those your kids?
Yes.
Two of your kids, yeah. Wow. Did you ever get to pet the Dalmatian?
No, he was off limits to anybody except the firemen.
And what was his role?
He rode on the truck to the fires. He was their mascot.
So my last question, I know I said I had one last question before. Did you have a generally positive impression of San Francisco?
Oh yes, it was a wonderful area, wonderful city. But it was out of our league. And we would come back as visitors.
And would you mind just sharing your name and how old you are now?
I'm Helen Dunston. I'm 93 years old. So I just gave up my driver's license. And that was a big step, really.
Well, you mentioned you had a stick shift when you first got here, right?
Oh, yes.
But you had to give that up. But you got it. Tell me that real quick again. What did you trade in your stick shift for when you got here?
Oh, when we got to San Francisco, we had a car that had a stick shift, and we couldn't really manage it on the hills. So we sold it and bought a stove and refrigerator for our new apartment.
And you got pretty good mileage out of those things?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes.
It was colder back then, I guess.
Well, it was always foggy and drippy wet. But we'd go downtown to work, wear a scarf over my hair in the mornings, and take the streetcar down. So.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for sharing. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.